So now we continue with our rockstar keynote speakers, the lineup we have today, and it's my pleasure to introduce Associate Professor Nana Oishi, who's from Melbourne University of Melbourne, to deliver the keynote speech on immigration in Japan. This is all based on Nana's recent research, and as you'll see, it's all very data-driven, deep, careful research, and this is exactly what we need for what is a very politically and socially sensitive topic with a lot of exaggeration and misinformation, I think, in the press. So Nana was a professor of sociology at Sophia University in Tokyo and a policy analyst at the International Labour Organization before. Also served on the UN expert meeting on migration, development and social protection, and completed her PhD at Harvard University on a Fulbright scholarship, of course, under the supervision of the legendary Ezra Vogel. So all those credentials and all this research, we're looking forward to some, as we were talking about, adult supervision on understanding what's happening in immigration in Japan. So over to you, Nana. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, Shiro, for the very kind and generous introduction. Today, I wanted to talk about my book that I published last year, which is called 流出する日本人 海外移住の光と影, which is really about Japanese immigration out of the country, which has been really growing. But because of what happened in July, I think many of you are aware what happened to the election, upper house election last month. And this was the first time that migration really became the huge agenda. So I kind of decided to, at the last minute, I decided to shift my topic more to immigration issues, which I also have been conducting research, particularly in regional areas of Japan. And I really figured out like how much disparity exists between cities and regional areas. Like big cities in Tokyo, the situations are very, very different in regional areas in Japan. So I wanted to sort of step back and see Japan as a whole, not just from the perspectives of people in Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya, Fukuoka, and all those big cities, but also from the perspectives of people in regional areas. Okay, so my talk title is Japan at Crossroads, Immigration, Emigration, and Demographic Sustainability. All right, I think I cannot really read it from this part. So I think Kitao-sensei has a fantastic presentation earlier today on population aging and population decline and birth rates decline. So the number of births in 2024 was 680,000, which this figure was, however, expected for 2039. But it was reached 15 years ahead of schedule. And the population decline between 2023 and 2024 was 530,000 in total. But when you look at just Japanese people, it was 918,000. So like almost, like 918,000 people disappeared in 1 year, which is a huge number, right? So it's almost like one big city is disappearing every year. So this is quite a big impact. So this also includes overseas immigration of Japanese people, which somebody mentioned earlier today. Oops, this way. So, and it's very interesting, it was kind of striking, kind of sad at the same time, is the outflows of Japanese citizens comprise 13% of the net population decline between 2005 and 2024. So it's not just like fewer babies are born and more older people die. On top of that, there are a lot of people who are leaving Japan. So it's not just those, death and death and birth, but also emigration counts, and it's significantly counting more. All right. So overseas Japanese, their number is about 1.3 million, and long stayers, it's about 0.7 million, including expats, international students, working holiday makers, and so forth. But what's really important is that the number of permanent residents, like myself and some others here, it just keeps increasing every year, and we are hitting the record high. Last year was 0.6 million, which is still small. But the issue is that those people who are leaving the country are very skilled, highly educated professionals. And there are spouses as well, but also high net worth individuals, meaning that investors or the very wealthy people who have huge assets, they are leaving the country because of the tax issue and the future concerns about the country's economy. So the dark color is like permanent residence, and the blue, sort of lightish blue color is a sort of kind of temporalish long-term migrants. So you can see that the after year 2020 or so, or 2019 or so, the long-term stayers or sort of quasi long stayers, like temporary migrants, has been declining partly because a lot of Japanese companies decided to kind of withdraw their staff, Japanese staff, from overseas branches because of the high costs. Right? But the number of permanent residents has been increasing. All right, and I think many of you know that the labor force in Japan is in decline and is projected to decline even further. So since 2010s or so, there have been 3 policy discourses on migration emerging in the country. The first one is globalism, driven by Keidanren and Japan Business Association. And more top, big companies want sort of innovative people, sort of for global. They feel that they need to win the global in the global competition for talent. And I think for big corporations, they really feel that they need to open up the labor market, and they want to sort of attract people, top people from overseas, cream of the crop. And the second policy discourse is nationalism. And more people began to feel that Japan has been in the demographic crisis. And more people are getting concerned about the sustainability of their own communities and people. And it was, before that, I just wanted to add that they had a sort of quantitative surveys and a data analysis with other sort of experts on statistics. And they found that nationalistic people in regional areas where population has been rapidly declining, nationalists, right? Japanese nationalists were very pro-migration because they felt that if without migration, their community's survival was at stake. So we found it very interesting. Wow, nationalistic people are now supporting migration. So it's really that serious. And the third discourse is regionalism. Chiho Sosei, I think many have heard the word regional vitalization, and that's kind of linked to the concept of regionalism. But the nationalists in depopulated areas are pro-migration, and then people are really concerned about the disappearance of regional areas. So I think many of you know that in 2014, the former minister found that 896 municipalities will be possibly disappearing by 2050. Now they updated the data to 744, but still that's a huge number, right? So the policy discourses have been shifted to regional sustainability and more focus on security and labor force and so forth, particularly for taking care of elderly people in regional areas and also to sustain regional economy. So having said that, so people really, even though a lot of people saw Japan as very close countries, ethno-nationalistic, but when you really look at the data, they look really different. Japanese public has been actually supporting migration for quite some time, since about mid-2014, 2015 or so. Some data show even before that. And even during the COVID time, 2020 November, when people's mentality was changing across the world, right? People are really close-minded at the time. Even at the time when they took the data, almost 70% of Japanese people said it's a good thing to have more migrants in the country. Right? So, and also this is 2018, different data taken by Asahi Shimbun. What do you think of the government policy of increasing migration? And then in 2018, it was like people who agreed was 44, and sort of disagree was 46. It's like, 50-50 almost. But in 2020, it was 62% of people said, we should increase migration. And there's lots of surveys done by different people, different companies. But overall, when I looked at all kinds of data and surveys, I would say like about 60% of Japanese overall supported migration, increasing migration. until this year. So things changed quite a bit. That's why my talk title was Japan at Crossroads. Right, so with this public support, the Japanese government has been adopting a lot of new policies, major policy reforms. One policy reform was related to attracting semi-skilled and unskilled migrants. So I think many of you have heard that we have this visa called specific skilled worker visa, Tokutei visa, accept migrants into 16 sectors facing severe labor shortage, such as agriculture, fishery, construction, elderly care. And then the first type, there are two types of visas in this. And then the first SSW1 visa, I think people can stay up to 5 years, but after that, no, right? And then they cannot really bring family members or anything. But the SSW2 visa, once you pass the skill test, and if you get this second visa, SSW second visa, then there's no limitation for visa renewals. You can bring your family from home. And then potentially, like after meeting some requirements, you can apply for permanent residency in Japan. So people, even though the government said like this is not immigration policy, but it really leads to permanent residency of permanent settlement of people. And 2019 to 2023 intake plan was 345,000, and between 2024 and 2029 it was 820,000, which is a lot from some people's perspectives. And also the second one is training and employment system. I think many of you have heard that Gino Jishu Seido, technical intern training program, was really heavily criticized. They have lots of problems, and the government finally decided to overhaul it and replace this technical intern training program with this new system called Shiro. They haven't done that yet, but they announced it ahead of time, and they are saying that they will start the new system in 2027. So the government is really now in the preparation for that. Right, and if according to this new scheme, people can just move from one place to another as they wish, and they can stay for up to 3 years, and they can transition to SSW1 and after that SSW2 if they pass the skill test, and then they can eventually become permanent residents if they meet all the criteria and so forth. Right. And the second type of policy reform was for skilled workers. The first one is called Japan System for Special Highly Skilled Professionals. It's called so-called JSKIP. So this one allows skilled professionals with high annual earnings to enjoy various privileges and benefits. And the second one is called Japan System for Future Creation of Individual Visa, so-called J-FIND visa. This one allows people to stay in Japan for 2 years and do anything. You can do anything. So like NU is one of the top universities. So if you are students here at NU, if you apply for this J-FIND visa, you can go to Japan for 2 years and do anything. It's just really, really interesting visa to sort of proactively trying to recruit top people like you guys into to Japan. Right. And also the government tried to attract many migrant startups and entrepreneurs from overseas. I'm not going to go every single one of them, but just wanted to let you know that the Ministry of Economic and Trade and Industry, METI, started this startup visa scheme in 2018, and then more and more municipalities, cities, prefectures, about 20 prefectures and cities have actually applied for this startup scheme, visa scheme, and also national strategic special zone scheme, so that they can try to attract people from overseas to start businesses in their own areas, and they have lots of alleviations of requirements. All right, so with these new policy reforms, the number of migrants has been increasing in Japan. Now we have 3.8 million people, migrants in Japan, which is still, percentage-wise, still small, only 2.8%. But it's a 52% increase for the last 10 years. And this is just migrant workers, excluding family members and so forth. It has been also increasing and more than tripled between the last in 2013 and 2024. So the percentage-wise is still small, but increasing quite rapidly. And as I said before, 820,000 specified skilled workers will be coming into the country, or they're already here. Some of them are. And the training and employment scheme, under this scheme, the employers can hire 2 to 3 times more migrant workers than the technical training and internship scheme, intern program. So there will be a lot more migrants coming into Japan under the existing policy reforms. And in 2070, the government institute was projecting that migrants will be comprising 10.8% of the total population in Japan. And the Ministry of Justice report, which just came out 5 days ago, it said that this pace could be actually much faster. We might arrive at this stage much faster than that. So when you have some people coming into the country quite rapidly, fast pace, then they can trigger some concerns among some people. So since last year, particularly, but it has been happening for the last couple of years. So there have been growing concerns about irregular migrants. So I think some of you have seen the media reports saying that asylum seekers whose applications were turned down are still remaining in the country and forming ethnic enclaves. And according to Nikkei Asia, 4,233 foreigners in 2022 who had been ordered to leave but were still in Japan. And after 2024, because the government changed the law, only 2 attempts for asylum application were allowed, but then forcible repatriation, and then it used to be where forcible repatriation was possible, but it was happening very rarely. But in the past, before 2024, people could actually apply for asylum as many times as possible, as many times as they wanted. So when people got rejected, they just kept applying for that. I mean, there are some genuine cases, but many people felt that there are people who were rejected multiple times, and then they were still staying, and some people began to feel upset because those people began to form ethnic enclaves, and there are some issues and there are frictions between them and local communities and so forth. The media reports really played a major role as well in this. But there are definitely genuine applications, so I think we should not forget that. But the fact that local frictions do exist is a fact. So how to address that is becoming an issue. Right, and the second issue is over-tourism. I think some of you might have been Japan recently, and you probably have seen the number of tourists has been increasing quite a bit. And particularly in some areas, like Kyoto or Niseko, those places, I think the over-tourism has definitely affected local people's lives. And then, some tourists and migrants unfortunately don't follow their local rules and manners, and then local people are getting more upset. And media reports of migrant entrepreneurs engaging illegal businesses and illicit activities. Again, it's media, so the media is always trying to highlight sort of bad cases of migrants and so forth. So these cases actually got a lot of attention these days. And in particular, misinformation and disinformation on SNS has been quite rampant. I think that's everywhere in the world, I think, but particularly intensively for the last year or so, I would say like a year or two or so. And particularly this year, a lot of people began to claim that migrants are free riders of the national health insurance, international students are getting $100,000, and then we are deprived, right? So the growing sense of deprivation has been felt by local people because of over-tourism, based on information and disinformation. Some of these misinformation and disinformation are totally unfounded, and it's really wrong, incorrect. There are lots of data floating around sort of misinforming people. But unfortunately, I think media and the government are really trying to address that, but it's not sufficient yet. So some people still do believe the wrong information. And also geopolitical concerns do exist, and because of the large influx of Chinese migrants, and because of this, U.S.-China relationship is not going too well, and Japan is kind of in the middle, because we have a lot of U.S. bases in Japan, and so forth. So there are some sort of geopolitical tensions, and some people began to feel that the sort of bringing in, accepting too many migrants from China, is it a good thing? And some people unfortunately began to question that. So government has begun to respond to these concerns, and then in May 2025 this year, so they issued a plan for zero undocumented residents by reducing irregular migrants by half by the end of 2030. That's the goal. And also they decided to strengthen deportation processes. And 2 months ago in July, they established this new office for the promotion of an orderly coexistence society with foreigners. And they're trying to tackle irregular migration, migrants' crimes, and illicit activities. And August this month, they also announced that they plan to change the business manager visa requirement from 5 million yen to 30 million yen. They'll try to focus more on wealthy migrants and large enterprises. Right, so what happened in July this year to the House of Councilors election was that it was the first time for Japan to face migration as a major election issue. So I think many of you know that the LDP lost quite heavily, and it became a minority. And Sanseto increased its presence from one seat, just one seat, to 14 seats. Right? But still, they still comprise 5.6% of the upper house. Very small, right? I think. So it's really not that they are really, having a sweeping victory. 0.65% of the lower house, right? And they're not even far right either. They're just populist, in my view. I could be wrong, but I believe that they are not far right. Partly because they support the intake of migrants up to 10% of the population. Right? Now we have 2.8% of the population being migrants, but they said, well, we believe that we should have an upper limit, which is 10% of the population, which is much bigger than the current number, right? So they are willing to accept migrants, even though they're trying to restrict the rights of migrants and so forth, which is a problem. Obviously, that's a problem. But they are still willing to take migrants because the labor market in Japan is so tight, and migrants are really needed across the country, right? So other political agenda they have is lower tax, support single mothers, anti-vaccination agenda, more funds for free schools for hikikomori people, supporting sustainable energies, far right. In other countries, probably not, right? And the promotion of organic farming. When I saw this, I was like, what? Organic farming? Is it the far right agenda? I'm not sure about that. Right? So when you really look at the political agenda they've got on their website, it's very interesting. It's not necessarily far right in a traditional sense. Right? So it's really important for us to just not to believe in what media says, but we just go and figure what's really happening. Right. So at the same time, they used the word Japanese first, for the election, which was really catching attention. But what does it entail? Re-examine the specific skilled worker visa, set the threshold, even though up to 10%. And the limit migrants' access to national health insurance. When I came here to give a talk last time too, I explained it. In Japan, everyone is covered by national health insurance as long as they live for more than 3 months. In Australia, you have to be a permanent resident or citizen to be covered by Medicare, right? So international students are excluded, working holiday makers are excluded. A lot of people are excluded in Australia by Medicare. But in Japan, everyone is covered. But at the same time, so I said it it's really, really inclusive. It's wonderful. But when people realize, a lot of people don't know about it in Japan, that in other countries that's not the case. So when people realize that in other countries they are not doing the same thing, just like Australia or New Zealand or Singapore, etc., they're not doing the same thing, right? So when they realize that Japan is actually quite generous, they began to question, can we just keep this system? Isn't it that we are being taken advantage of, right? But actually, to be honest with you, it's actually a good thing for Japan because most migrants are coming to Japan as young people, right? Young students or young workers and so forth. They don't really need that much health care, right? So when you look at the percentage of the use of actual medical services, the percentage is actually lower. But then they contribute, so the national health care insurance actually benefits. They get more money than they're spending. So it's good for Japan. So I personally think they should just keep doing it. But people began to feel that aren't we getting taken advantage of? That kind of concern emerged because they don't have enough data, enough facts, and so forth. That's why the fact-driven, empirically driven, evidence-driven policymaking, and also communicating that policy, communicating the rationale of doing this, has to be better communicated to the public. Right, and also they're talking about they need to limit the number of scholarships. It is true that Japanese government gives away lots of scholarships to international students, and these people said, well, the scholarships should be given to Japanese people who cannot afford to go to universities. Tougher requirements are needed for PR, permanent residence, and naturalization, and so forth. And the restricting foreigners' lands acquisition in sort of places particularly close to the airport, the basis of self-defense force, etc. There's some kind of restriction, but it's not saying that you cannot sell the land to migrants if it's closer to the airport. It says you need to be reassess the applications, but it doesn't really prohibit the sale of the land to foreigners in a sort of critical areas. So that's why they are saying that they should be more strict about selling lands to foreigners in sort of very important areas. All right, so despite the fact that, despite the sort of media treatment of Sanseito, or Japan shifting to the right wing, far right, still Japanese people are relatively balanced in terms of opinion. The percentage has declined in terms of the number of supporting people who are supporting the increase of migration, still half and half almost, right? And also, the regional areas are still very, very eager to accept migrants. So 86% of municipal government heads said we need to increase migration. And also, National Governor Association conference last month, they advocated for more robust multicultural policies and the creation of funds for multicultural coexistence at the national level. And they see migrants as very important local stakeholders. They said national government views foreigners as workers, but from a perspective of local governments, they are community members, just like Japanese people. So they really see them as the equals, and then they really welcome them still. Right, but there's still challenges for Japan in terms of attracting and retaining skilled migrants. As you know, that yen is becoming weak, and also low wage is an issue. Long-term career prospects are still a challenge. Work-life balance, children's education, institutional systems, gender inequality, those things are still in many migrants' mind, and not all of them will stay in Japan. Some of them do leave and come to Australia, for example. Some of them do. And I met those people in the past. So Japan needs to become a more attractive society for migrants so that migrants will continue to come to the country and stay on. All right, and the Ministry of Justice study group report, it's not the official document, but the fact that Justice Minister published this report under his name suggests that it could lead the future discussion in the government. So there are two very important points that I picked. One is a commitment to further migration. So the report said we will also realize that a truly vibrant Japanese society by achieving genuine coexistence with foreigners, with a view toward a future where the foreign resident population reaches 10%. Right? So they are willing to accept a lot more people, continue to accept more people. And also, they are advocating the need for long-term strategies for migration by going beyond the stopgap measures and Band-Aid policy that the government has adopted so far. It's really interesting that they had this kind of reflective, kind of Hansei type statement, which is really, really unusual. So I was quite surprised to see this sort of wording. All right, so as a conclusion, I would like to say Japan has not shifted to the far right as a whole society. Many regions and employers still welcome migrants, particularly when you go to the countryside, you'll see very, very different attitudes. But concerns are also emerging. We need further efforts for tackling disinformation and misinformation and promoting the circulation of correct information backed by empirical evidence. And most of all, direct in-person interactions between Japanese and migrants are crucial for creating cohesive communities. More national and municipal funds are needed to promote these interactions and more involvement of local stakeholders. And Japanese overseas migration and return migration also help in this because many return migrants are playing key roles in regional communities in Japan, trying to help migrants get adjusted to their lives in different parts of the regions and so forth. They are really making important roles, playing important roles. So how to increase these people-to-people ties holds the key for multicultural coexistence in Japan and perhaps in many other migrant-receiving countries in the world. With this, I would like to close my talk. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Nana. We might get you and the panelists to move to the front, and we'll have a chance to ask Nana some questions too. But we're now shifting a bit to people-to-people ties, as Nana finished on. And I'll explain why. We haven't had this sort of session in the Japan Update before. But of course, this is an important part of the bilateral relationship. People-to-people ties are very thick. Australia's overtaken China recently to house second largest Japanese diaspora population in the world after the United States. That's quite significant. And last year there were 900,000 Australians going to Japan as tourists. And this year it's projected to be well over 1 million. So 1 million tourists in Japan from Australia. They're still going to Bali, but not as much. Mainly to Japan and ski fields and crowding Kyoto and Niseko. A lot of that's driven by a weak yen, of course. It used to be Japanese tourists in Australia dominating the two-way traffic. But we're seeing fewer Japanese coming here on holiday or as tourists. Because the yen is weak, but also only 17% of Japanese people have passports, the latest data shows. So some issues there. Now, I mentioned this at the beginning of the day, and we'll see more this afternoon, I think, about the thickness in the relationship politically, strategically, economically. And this is where we want to explore the people-to-people issues, because that's really important for understanding each other, for Australians to understand Japanese institutions, politics there, but vice versa as well. So we need more literacy on Japan and the thickness in people-to-people working across both countries. We don't have too many journalists, Australian journalists in Japan. How much do Japanese people understand Australia and so forth? And it's understandable. Japan is located in Northeast Asia, right next to China, South Korea, North Korea as well, and focuses very much on the United States. And we're very far away geographically, but we're very close, I think, politically again and strategically. Mm. Now, next year is the 50th anniversary of the Basic Treaty of Friendship and Cooperation between Australia and Japan. It's often referred to as the Nara Treaty, Nippon-Australia Relations Agreement. The 1956 Treaty on Commerce opened up goods trade and really started the resource trade between our two countries. The 1976, I'm getting the dates slightly wrong here, 57 and 76 agreement that we're celebrating the 50th anniversary for next year, that really extended that not from goods trade but to investment and people-to-people movement. So Australia granted Japanese equal best access, most favoured nation treatment for migration, for example. And it really elevated the relationship, and that's what we really enjoy today. So it's very significant, and next year's a big opportunity. The Australia-Japan Foundation was created in that year, and a whole host of initiatives were launched. So to explore some of these big issues and dig deeper, we have started with the keynote speech, but we're joined by two panelists who are on the Australia-Japan Foundation board. In fact, Natsuko Ogawa is the chair of the AJF. I'm lucky enough to have joined recently on this board. This is one of the mandates, of course, one of the purposes of the AJF. to look at these very issues and to strengthen people-to-people ties. So we're joined by Leonie Boxtel, who is Executive Officer of the Bonus Family Foundation, and a whole host of other things, and very rich experience in philanthropy, but also at the forefront of connecting Australia to Asia, not just Japan. The full bio is in the program, of course. And then Natsuko Ogawa, who, as I mentioned, is chair of AJF, partner at Ashurst. It's her day job, bringing Japanese capital into Australia, not just capital, but all the technology and everything that else is connected, but is also on the advisory board for the Australia-Japan Research Centre. So very grateful, Natsuko, for that last bit too. But look, we've had a nice overview of Japan's journey in opening up. I thought I might kick to Natsuko to start, to respond to anything that Nana has mentioned, to react, or to talk about how you see things from Australia.
Thank you, Shiro, and thank you, Nana, for that wonderful presentation, as always. I think I will just start by making some comments around your presentation, and in particular the over-tourism issue. So quite recently, a couple of weeks ago, I was fortunate to be able to moderate a panel at the Nikkei Asia Forum, which was held for the second time this year in Melbourne this time. It was held for the first time in Sydney last year. And on that panel, I was fortunate enough to have the Mayor of Hakuba Village and also a representative from JTB speaking around some of the issues in relation to tourism. The first observation is that obviously the perspective of the Hakuba village in relation to tourism was overwhelmingly positive, in the sense that it has obviously made a huge contribution to regional development, which again sort of speaks to a number of the other presentations, I think, today, but particularly to your observations around how generally participation of foreigners and tourists is actually a very positive thing for the regional economies. The other observation, though, is that, as you mentioned, there is a bit of a cultural divide in terms of understanding of tourists. Perhaps tourists that aren't so familiar with Japan, so are new to Japan, who have heard about, the powder snow and the great food, how friendly the local people are, who they are, obviously, and they've come in without sort of any real cultural awareness and understanding the sensitivities. And so there was some really good discussion around trying to kind of get that cultural understanding to occur. But I think that one of my takeaways from that is that obviously, as all of us travel around the world, we are actually representing our own country when we go to those other countries. It doesn't matter if you're going there on business or as a diplomat. You can be going there as a tourist and you're still representing your country. And so it's really important to have that awareness, and it would be really great if people could, in going to another country like Japan, also take some time to try and understand more the cultural norms or what's expected, so that they can represent Australia in a positive way in that opportunity. And I might then sort of move on to just make a few other remarks around my journey in the role as AJF chair, which I was very fortunate to be appointed to that role around this time last year. In fact, I think I'm sort of coming up to about 12 months. Without really too much knowledge, to be fair, on the role itself and the work that the foundation does. Leonie actually has a much longer connection with the foundation, and she'll probably be able to speak a little bit about that. But it has been the most magnificent journey for me in that role. And I would say that I want to just go back to mentioning that my background is that I was born in Australia, in Perth, back in 1972, and my family, my father actually moved to Australia originally on a Australia-Japan Business Cooperation Committee scholarship, where he says that he had the choice of going to teach at a school, teach Japanese at a school in Geelong or in Perth, and he happened to choose Perth. Now, this was at a time in the sort of late 60s where obviously there was a lot of new investment coming in from Japan, and there was a great need to actually have Japanese language education in schools. And so as part of that, my father came here. So the point of saying that is partly that, my background is that my parents are both Japanese. I grew up actually with a very strong feeling of being Japanese. I was raised as a Japanese person, even though I grew up in Australia. And in my lifetime, I've only spent 6 years altogether living in Japan, and that was all after I'd graduated and started working. So I was already an adult by the time I went and lived in Japan. But I've always felt that in this country that I represented Japan to Australian people, and in my work, I focus on representing Japanese clients and helping them obviously do their business with non-Japanese people in this country. And so what was a really great mind shift for me was coming into the role as the AJF chair was to actually realise that now I'm representing Australia to Japan. And probably the first moment where I felt that was where, first of all, when I was asked, I said, well, I'm not an Australian citizen. Is it okay if I take on this role? Is that okay? And they said, oh, it probably is fine. Hopefully it is fine. And the second thing was in the announcement, they said, well, is it okay if we refer to you as a Japanese Australian or an Australian Japanese? And I was thinking, that's really weird. I've never really thought of myself as being anything other than a Japanese person who's been born and raised and works in Australia. So yeah, it sort of made me sort of question really my identity and how I'd sort of thought about myself all this time, and really why did I even care whether I was Japanese or Australian really. But I had this very strong sense of pride that I was Japanese, I was purely Japanese, and I can be as Japanese as anybody else. And that was a lot of the way that I conducted myself all this time. So it's been quite liberating. It's been wonderful to really dive into and understand how wonderful this country, Australia, really is, and to have the privilege of being able to represent Australia to Japanese people. And that's just a little story about me and my journey, but I think it links a little bit to the immigration story because hopefully that'll sort of maybe get some thoughts going around, I suppose, the experience of immigrants in this country where, you can be here for a very long time and you may never really feel like you fully belong or that you're fully accepted or that you can really realise your full potential. And then some of our own mental barriers or barriers that we make for ourselves where we try to define ourselves in a particular way that also limits us and the way that other people see us. So that's a few thoughts just to get things going, and I don't know whether Leonie would like to jump in and say something about, or I'll let you moderate, Shiro, rather than try to take over.
And thanks for sharing your story too. I want to come back to something a little later on, the lack of cultural awareness that many people have when travelling overseas and what we might be able to do about that, actually. But Leonie, to you first, and how do things look from your end, on Asian literacy, understanding Japan? Are we doing okay in this country, or are we going backwards? Because it seems we have fits and starts and bursts of energy, and then we can't sustain the investment. Superficially, that's what it looks like. But how do you see things?
Allow me to make one comment back to Nana's presentation, if I might, because I think the migration piece is a really salient conversation for Australia as much as it is for Japan. One of the things that I think has changed is we often talk about the media. So what I was thinking when you were presenting was it's often where do myths emerge from? Who promulgates the myths that fuel people's views on migration? 50 years ago, it probably was the ownership of a couple of key major dailies. But these days, we have the capacity to message very differently than we used to. And so I feel like there's some really big opportunities to talk about the pluses and the blips, if you like, in migration, whether it be here in Australia or in Japan, across a whole range of different platforms. So I feel like that's an opportunity to really explore into the space. Going back to literacy, it's a really interesting exercise. I was just thinking of the fact that, for example, you can be intentional about language and experience, and you can get a scholarship, and you can spend time in country that way. In 1980, not long after the treaty was signed and the AGF was formed, Australia and Japan set up working holiday maker program, and there's still 35,000 Australians heading across each year and 17,000 Japanese here this year, which is the largest ever. I'm not going to suggest that it's the perfect way to acquire language or skills, but there's nothing like an actual experience to underwrite some of that. So as one mechanism, I think that's one that continues to work. It's really interesting that Japan has no cap on Australian working holiday numbers, and it has caps on other countries. But when we think about education-wise, it's interesting that overseas study in Australia hasn't always been well recognised in workplaces. I think that's changed over time, which is a good thing. But I wonder, and I was having a discussion yesterday about, in Japan, the relative risk or benefit that's attached to overseas study, and the mindset that sits behind that, I think, is something that we need to continually be considering. There's certainly been, if you look at Asian language study in Australia, the numbers look good, but we're studying at primary school as opposed to in high schools and in universities. I don't have a chart, so I won't boggle people with numbers. But we are seeing a decline in Asian language study, including Japan, in high schools. Expertise beyond that has been a long-standing, I won't say bugbear, but certainly a long-standing concern, and we need to find ways mutually to support mechanisms. We have lots of mechanisms, but I don't know that we leverage them as much as we could.
Natsuko, for your work at Ashurst, is there a pretty decent pool of graduates you can recruit that know where Japan is on the map and won't embarrass themselves in front of clients, or is that changing over time?
I think it's gone in cycles, actually. So right now we're in a pretty good cycle where there's been some really outstanding graduates, and I would probably do a bit of a shout out to the New Colombo plan, because that has also encouraged very talented students to look to countries like Japan to go and do that further study that can actually help them to then take it to the next level, rather than just having studied at school and enjoyed it. And so, yeah, I think the pipeline does come and go a bit, but I suppose that, when people see other people being successful, then that does create a bit of, interest in pursuing that kind of path. So I think people coming out of, Australian universities with that language ability and understanding, that's pretty good. I think wouldn't mind sort of seeing a little bit more from, some Japanese attorneys being able to come to Australia and being able to have successful careers here. That would be really positive. I think that, some of the issues that I think you also raised, or we had a discussion around recognition of qualifications between countries. Law is probably relatively easier, I would have thought, compared to other professions where it almost seems impossible sometimes to get your qualification recognised, and therefore you end up not having that opportunity. But, certainly the cultural exchange that happens from having a diverse group of people, not just coming through a one single path, but a different path, navigating, not navigating sort of different perspectives and trying to sort of, synthesise those and understand each other, that is incredibly valuable to produce a collective understanding of what's sort of the best solution in a particular circumstance. And I think that might lead on actually to really, one of the things that with people to people, what it would be really powerful to see happening is people coming together with those different perspectives and different views, and almost struggling through that to kind of get to a mutual and deeper understanding of how things might work. And that sort of co-creation sort of piece is something that I think is indicative of that deeper relationship, rather than understand you and you understand me and you'll do it your way and we'll do it our way. It's more like finding a mutual sort of comfortable, I think you used the word bridge before too, Shiro, just a way forward together. That's, I think, the sign of a really good, relationship.
Yeah, so that's a big role for the AJF, and with its limited resources that maybe should be considered bumped up for the 50th anniversary next year. But the New Colombo plan is a pretty important asset, institution in the relationship now. It has been expanded recently, not just for Australia and Japan, but more broadly. But it's still missing support for postgraduate students, master's, PhD students, where students have already invested a lot and committed to studying a particular country. So that's probably a fairly low-cost way to encourage more pathways to more bridge builders and that kind of work. Now, I'm going to open it up to the audience for questions relatively early, because I'm sure a lot of people have a lot of questions. But just before I do, so get ready. Hands are going up already. I will ask Nana just to reflect. I'm jumping around a bit. How ready is Japan institutionally to receive more migrants, immigrants? Because in Australia we have some strong support in language training, for example, and government assistance. In Japan, people can get free or access to the health insurance after 3 months. But what other support is there available? Is Japan ready for gradually increasing immigration?
It's becoming ready, but the biggest hurdle is language. Language requirement. The Japanese government passed the law that sort of provides more language help a couple of years ago. But when it comes to who's going to teach, right? Because of the demographic decline, the number of teachers has been limited and stuff like that. So it's still quite challenging, the language part. That's a good point.
Great. Go to Diane first, and then question here.
Carol Lawson from the University of Tokyo. You may be remembering my twin from whose name is Diane. Faculty of Law, and this question is for Natsuko, because competing in the Tokyo Intercollegiate Negotiation Competition, bilingual competition, which is diabolically difficult and has, since Kent Anderson put his shoulder to the wheel in 2005, produced 15 generations of Japan-capable Australian lawyers, many of whom are now reaching partner level in Tokyo and elsewhere. Since COVID, Australia has not fielded a Japanese-speaking team. And I teach and coach the University of Tokyo team. We compete in both languages. Australia, having stopped competing in Japanese, has created a chasm, a gaping hole in the competition. And so I recommend that. This is really me stumping for the Australia-Japan Foundation to invest in locating the raw talent, students studying law who may be bicultural, who may be trilingual. Often these days we're finding students have Korean, Chinese and Japanese, or quadrilingual, and returning to investing in future generations of Australian, Japan-capable attorneys appearing in Tokyo and driving forward all the great things we're doing together, particularly in the defence and resources sectors. So I think we're looking at a slowly slimming and starving pipeline at the moment.
We'll collect questions. But Carol, just on that, it's not an AJF issue, is it? It needs a champion to organise something at the ANU, perhaps. That's what's missing?
Yes, from Tokyo, we don't really mind who does it.
Sure. The next question here. Mum, if you could put your hand up, the person in front of my mum. I'm going to stop calling out names because I can't see faces so clearly.
Hello everyone, Lewis Tremaine. I've just finished my master's thesis on foreign tourism in Japan. So my question's to anyone on the panel, but what I've found is that recently most people who are going to Japan, especially the younger people, their vision of Japan and what they know about it is coming from social media and from other travellers rather than from Lonely Planet guides and the old getaway shows and all that sort of stuff. So what I was wondering is if there is any sort of potential there for even for the AJF or for any local governments or anything to be working with these foreign tourists to make sure that they're actually giving off the right image of this place, which kind of leans into the idea of cultural awareness and, in a way, cultural diplomacy. So, yeah, thank you.
And one last question here before we'll go another round.
My name's Jack from the Australian Department of Education, and I had a question for Nana Sensei. Your last slide mentioned that you need more direct in-person interactions between foreigners and Japanese people.
Yes.
I was lucky enough to go to Japan on the JET program for 5 years, and a lot of, like, not strictly a migrant program, but it was a great way to go to rural Japan and participate in grassroots internationalisation and mutual, learning and growing. Do you see the JET program or something like that having a role in building those connections between migrants and Japan that you're talking about? Thank you.
All right, so we've got 3 questions there, and I'll let you answer whichever you want. Leonie, do you want to start? And we'll come down this way. Answer whichever one you want.
Let me go to the last question. Having been the second year of the JET program myself over in Japan at a time when there were way fewer foreigners than the numbers you put up. My sense, one of the things I wanted to say in terms of the way forward is we have these really strong pillars of engagement that exist. And I think if we think about 1970, we were trying to change the mindsets of Australians in relation to how they felt about Japan. It was a very fundamentally different response. If you asked my grandfather's generation about Japan, we were not talking in the way we are today about Japan. So things have moved phenomenally, and I think the difference is we have these pillars that we should actually now be activating into some of the, you've written, I know one of your last slide, we had a series of difficulties. I see them all as opportunities for some of these pillars like sister city networks, the JET program, the Colombo program. The Japanese side has equivalents as well that can absolutely work into some of these issues.
You first, Natsuko.
I agree, and we've talked a lot about that. I think, as to Shiro's point, the AJF is a bit of a cheerleader and not necessarily one that is endowed with a huge amount of funds, but we're really keen to make sure that the funds that we do have get deployed in a very effective and impactful way. I think we're trying to make a difference to catalyse other groups, other people to be able to kind of take the steps they need to create ongoing sustainable relationships and collaborations. We can probably only really help you at the start of that journey to kick things off, but we also know that how powerful that is. So I need to mention the expo. Many of you will have gone to the Osaka Expo, which is on at the moment. To me, that is just an incredible demonstration of how bringing the right people together in the right kind of circumstance to really energise them, how powerful that can be. If our support, the AJF support, could do anything along those lines to really energise and excite people to actually take steps to, as I say, develop these networks or connect or pursue an idea that is really impactful, then our job will have been done. But I think that next year, as Shiro said, being the 50th anniversary for the foundation, as well as for the friendship, the Friendship Treaty is such a great opportunity for us to kind of reimagine what that might look like in the next 50 years, given, as Leonie said, we're not in the same place we were 50 years ago. We're in actually a much better place in terms of the relationship, possibly facing, or new, different, possibly very daunting challenges, but we do have that foundation to work with, so we're not starting from scratch. And yes, certainly, we won't be able to make that leap without energising all of those existing, networks and groups that have formed over that 50-year period.
Thank you. Sort of coming back to your question about JET program, my answer is absolutely yes. The program is making a huge impact on Japan, particularly in regional areas. And also, I didn't have time to talk about it, but Australians are actually making big impacts in other parts of Japan as well, like particularly in Hakuba in Niseko, where I did research field work. And so, for example, in Hakuba, Australians were the biggest minority when I visited. In Hakuba, the Australians were the biggest minority, and then they were really making huge impact on, for example, when the newcomers from other countries are coming into the village, they actually do help and try to get adjusted, because they're both foreigners and they go through difficulties and stuff. So Australians are doing a fantastic job in helping other migrants getting adjusted. That's one thing. And in Niseko also, they're doing the same thing. And in both places, Australians are taking the leadership in that sort of migrant communities, trying to integrate them and try to make bridges. And they are the bridge makers in both places. So that's why a lot of Japanese people do like Australians, because they're really making positive changes to Japanese societies. So I really hope that JET program is another one, and I think Australians are really bringing positive changes to Japan, and I'm very, very grateful for that.
We almost need a reverse JET program, don't we, to build some cultural awareness here. Let's go another round of questions. So we've got one in the middle here. We've got the gentleman in glasses there, and then we'll go John behind. So in the middle here. Actually, let's go Peter first while you get the other microphone to the middle here, Reese. Directing traffic.
When we established the Australia-Japan Foundation in 1975, I think it was. For all the reasons that Leonie mentioned, it was important to invest in the relationship through a foundation like the Australia-Japan Foundation, despite the great work that the Japan Foundation had already begun to do in the reverse direction. I think the budget allocation for foundation work in 1975 was 500K a year. I don't know what it is now, but in nominal terms, I don't think it's changed very much. So my question to the panel as a whole is, what would your case be for increasing the allocation for investment in exchanges between Australia and Japan from Australia? And what priorities would you give to that investment if you had the way?
Great. To the middle here.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Kyle, and I'm doing Master of International Relations right now in ANU. And I'm actually Taiwanese, but I used to do my bachelor in Japan. I have one question specifically for Oishi Sensei, is that what is Japanese government and Japanese public's attitude and awareness towards the Chinese immigrant? Because as we all know, both in East Asian countries, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan, we all facing the same issue, is that we really need immigrants to come to our countries and to boost our economy. But the thing is, we also see the case in China because of the political and economic instability, that there is more and more Chinese immigrants come to the neighboring countries. But the thing is, in Taiwan, for example, the government and also the public are really aware and have an awareness of the Chinese immigrant. A large amount of Chinese immigrants come into Taiwan because people are really afraid that the government, the CCP, will really use this large amount of Chinese immigrants to penetrate the Taiwanese society with its own influence. I was thinking about what is the situation in Japan as well. Thank you.
Right, we'll go John here, and then Sagiri, did you have a question? Yeah. We'll take 4 this round. John.
Okay, John Lamb, independent researcher. I finished a PhD last year on Japanese immigration to Australia, the history side. And putting that in context and what we're talking about, I actually did postgraduate study in Japan in the early 1970s. And if I went out as an Australian there and to local kids in the playground, you got "Nanijin desu ka?" Where you're from, and you got firstly Amerikajin, Deutschjin, Francejin. After a while, they gave up on trying to guess Australian. They came up Uchujin, and you know, are you from outer space? Are you an alien? And on that same context, at that time, to do study in Japan, I was issued with an alien registration card. And I thought, good grief, I know I'm not Japanese, but am I really an alien? I didn't realise until I started my history research that the Japanese took it from the Australians. The Australians introduced alien registration in 1916, and it still existed till the early 1970s. So, and when I went back to work in Japan some years later, the time of Shiro's father too, the young Japanese, they only knew about the surf and kangaroos, and the older generation, my generation, they only knew about Hakugo Shugi, the White Australia policy. So, and it was 420 yen to the dollar. So things have changed drastically, and in some ways they haven't changed. Sorry to bore you possibly with that background, but what I wanted to ask from it, and from those times, and my children spending some of their childhood in Japan, what most irritated them and me in some ways was being called gaijin all the time. And what I see in some of these presentations is still Japan is more conscious than anywhere else of wareware Nihonjin and gaijin. Is there any possibility of overcoming that in some ways, and maybe we're not Goshujin but Goshujin?
Thanks, John. And finally, Sagiri.
I have a question to Professor Oishi. So, do you think the government's projection about the foreigners in Japan representing 10% in 50 years realistic? Looking at the foreigners working in Japan now, most of them come from China, Philippines, Vietnam, and those countries' average wage is much lower than in Japan. So we can, still count on them. But maybe in 10 years, 20 years, their wages are going to exceed. So by that time, do we have to go down the ladder and then tap the countries that have lower wages? And then do you think that our attitude would change because of the compositional change?
Just to add on to that, the 2.8% number now, Nana, does that include all the students who are working at kombinis and...
Yes.
Okay.
Everybody.
Okay, right. Okay, we've got 4 questions there. Who would like to start? Leonie, let's go with you again and work our way down.
I'm going to start with Peter's question. Thank you. And unless Natsuko would like to take the... it is a modest amount we work with. We're not going to sugarcoat that. I think the case that the Australia-Japan Foundation has is 49 years of investment in some extraordinary people, locations, entities, and building up of systems and networks that I don't think if you tried to find an equivalent depth of potential to work with, I don't think it exists anywhere else in Australia. I think you've also... We do have a really fabulous ability to work both from here and in Japan at the same time, and we all know that we need that co-location to be able to make things work. We work strongly with the embassy there and with the partner entities. The other thing I would say is that we're incredibly trusted across the Australian landscape. So whether we talk to local government, whether we talk to universities, whether we talk to local community organisations, or even big institutes, there's definitely a very big recognition of the leverage that the foundation has. So perhaps you might say it's bigger than we actually are, but it does exist. In terms of priorities, it's a really tricky one, but I would definitely say that there's an opportunity around gender. There's a big opportunity in the gender space. Multiculturalism is a mutual area just for ongoing discussion, the whole nature of tolerance and ongoing discussion there. And I think in an educational perspective, even in multicultural education perspective, there's a huge amount of space there that could also be valued. It's not limited to that, but I won't labour the point.
That's cool.
Thanks, Leonie. That was well answered. I think the other thing I would say is that given the stage we're at now, where we're looking back at the last 50 years and thinking about the richness of the relationships that have actually formed, and hopefully next year, as we celebrate, we'll be bringing forward some of the amazing stories that we're starting to hear, and that's certainly something that I've been very privileged in the last year to actually get to meet some of the grant recipients from many years ago who, through our support, have actually grown incredibly deep and long-standing relationships. And people are, when you actually sort of meet them in person and you hear their stories in person, it's incredibly powerful and energising. And I can't sort of emphasise that more. I think exchanging information by emails or even on a Teams call it just can't replace that connection you feel when you're actually with somebody. And imagine if you're actually doing something you love with that other person, how much of a connection you build there. So these connections are extremely valuable. They are treasured, and we absolutely will be celebrating them next year. What we really want, though, is to then look to the next generation, and I think that's one of the key words that keeps coming up for us as a board is what does the next generation want to do with this relationship going forward? So that's not necessarily answering your question, Peter, as to the priorities. I mean, we'd probably like to hear from the next generation what are their priorities, because this is not necessarily our relationship to take forward. Like, we will steward that, but the people who are going to take it forward are the next generation coming through. And how can we inspire that next generation to look to Japan? I think we do recognise that education both ways. Definitely, we need to have another refreshed sort of focus around understanding Japan more deeply from Australia, because without that knowledge, we cannot. We don't have enough bridges, Shiro, to really be able to work effectively together. On the other hand, definitely we still want Australians to be able to go to Japan and experience that, and to also be great ambassadors for us on an ongoing basis. So, and we do want them to represent Australia as it is today. So we don't want them to represent Australia as it was, John, many years ago, where I think some people in Japan still believe that we have a white Australia policy in this country. We kind of need to actually represent contemporary Australia to Japan, which sort of goes back to my original remarks, which was sort of we have to understand ourselves better, and we have to understand what we can bring, what we can offer to Japan that is special, to then sort of get them excited about working with us. So just a few thoughts. I think, Peter, once we sort of start to kind of message that and really work together with these many other wonderful people who are obviously very keen to be involved in the relationship, we may start to be able to build a much better business case, Shiro, for us being funded to do more, or indeed others being funded to do more if that's more appropriate. That's fine. We're just kind of here as part of the ecosystem, and we'd like to continue to have an important role, and I don't think it's a problem if it's a evolving role, because frankly, things have changed in the last 50 years. So let's adapt and make sure that we continue to be impactful.
Fine, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the questions. So starting with this kind of difficult, challenging question about Chinese migrants, I have to say that in Japan there has been that discourse on, sort of concerning discourse on mainland Chinese people coming in a sort of large number. And media talks about it a lot, and I'm not even I don't even know whether the Chinese government does really have that kind of policy of like sending many migrants into Japan for for invasion kind of things. I don't know. I really don't know. And they might be. But my guess is that we need to be really careful that these days there are a lot of conspirational theories, conspiracy theorists. I think we need to be aware of that that kind of discourse. And I personally don't think that's very healthy for people to really sort of start with that discourse, because I personally know that there are so many Chinese people migrating in Japan, purely, like they're purely interested in Japanese society. They really want to get to know Japanese people. See, that's where the sort of direct in-person contacts really count, right? Because I know those people who love Japan, and they really want to live there for good as community members. So I know lots of people like that myself, right? So whether the Chinese government has some kind of idea or not, I don't care personally. And maybe the government should care. Maybe they should they have to think about it. I don't know. But I think we should. I personally don't think that's a good. I think that's a non-starter. And I think there's still lots of people, Chinese people, who really do care about Japan. But at the same time, I think we kind of passed the era of naive optimism. But we still need to remain optimistic about people-to-people ties. And we might have to sort of integrate the sort of perspective of economic security or the security in general to a certain extent, but not to the extent that could sort of hurt the ties, existing ties, and future ties between, people in general. So I still want to be optimistic about people's, good hearts and willingness to care for each other and to get to know each other. So that's the question. That's my answer to that question. And the second question about the gaijin mentality type, or the gaijin separation exclusion. A while ago, it was like that. I agree. But in recent years, things have been changing quite a bit because of so many kids with mixed backgrounds being born in Japan. So even 10 years ago or so, when I was still living in Japan, my son couldn't even differentiate those kids with mixed backgrounds and other Japanese kids. So my son said, "Oh, he's not American. He's Japanese." So we parents, his mom, so and so's mom is American, and he said, No, he really looks like Japanese, and he's Japanese, right? So, and he's Japanese, like my son's friend is Japanese. So kids actually have very different mentality, and then the community's mentality also have been changing quite a bit, partly because there's so many kids with mixed backgrounds, particularly in big cities and so forth. So it's no longer, maybe in some parts of Japan, I'm pretty sure there's still gaijin, discourse may exist, but it has been changing. And particularly lots of actors and actresses have also mixed backgrounds, and they become so popular. Like AKB48 has, this mixed background people, et cetera, et cetera. Like very, very popular actors and actresses are already having mixed backgrounds. So that actually helped change the attitude of people to, it's gradually changing. 10% possible, like Tao-sensei's question. That's a very, very good question. And I'm actually hoping that we can still keep that 10% or more. But you're right, because even in Vietnam now, it's becoming difficult to find people who want to go to Japan. A lot of them want to go to Korea because wages are higher in Korea, right? So I heard that even in Vietnam, it's very difficult to find people in cities, big cities, who want to go to Japan. So, but then when I was talking to recruiters in Japan, they said as long as there are countries of which GDP is 50% less than Japan, then those people will be still coming to Japan or something like that. I forgot the equation, but there's just some kind of equation that they came up with. And a specific number of countries are still willing to send people to Japan. So according to these recruiters, we can still make it to 10% or even higher. But to what extent that's possible, I personally don't know. But if not, then I think Japan will be in kind of big trouble, particularly in the care sectors.
Shrinking away to nothing.
Yeah.
Look, I want to end roughly on time, so I'm not going to take any more questions. I'm not going to try to sum up, but I do want to take the opportunity to try to be optimistic as well, but to highlight the amount of work that we still need to do. I want to be optimistic because you look at the relationship, you know, how far it's come, not just in 50 years, but even more recently. But think about where the two countries were, you know, at the time of signing the Commerce Treaty in 57. You know, you couldn't have imagined a better relationship. I do want to be optimistic about Japanese immigration too. If we can open up from having a white Australia policy, you know, it's possible for Japan. I think there's a lot of experience sharing, and I know you're living this and working on this, but so much more we can do to share the experience of Australia in Japan, of what's worked and what hasn't, the mistakes and the important things, the political leadership that's necessary. And then, you know, on to Peter's question, I think for me the reason for including this session in the update is I think we need a much bigger national investment in understanding Japan, but also understanding Asia. I think we're taking it for granted, and the relationship is at risk of just complacency. You know, we're cutting Japanese language programs in some universities. We're going backwards in a lot of areas, right? This kind of reinvestment or bigger investment would be even better if it's binational and we could do something collaboratively with Japan. It's not just an Australia-Japan foundation, but it's something from the other end to connect to these sorts of initiatives. The number of Japan specialists across academia and government, I won't talk for business, and the bridge builders, the numbers are shrinking. We've got people retiring, fewer Japan specialists in universities, fewer people like Bruce Miller, Ambassador Bruce Miller in government. There are a lot of Japan specialists, but not enough, considering how important the relationship is. You know, we're getting the Mogami frigates, and that's great, but you know, there's some pretty big misunderstandings on the submarines, and you know, we've had 3 years now of the energy relationship being a niggle in the relationship. For many of you who don't know, this is the solid foundation for the bilateral relationship, the economic relationship. And that has been diplomatically and government to government a niggle and extremely unproductive. So there's a lot of work to do. And on the AJF more specifically, I believe it plays an important role, but that has to be, I think, explained in public. It gives out very small grants, and they make a difference. They make a big difference because there's a lack of this kind of funding available. But they are very small grants, and we turn a lot of extremely good projects and proposals away. Now, I've only been involved for one round, but I couldn't believe how, you know, these wonderful projects should be 10 times bigger and approved. There just aren't the resources. So that argument has to be prosecuted, I think, and prosecuted in public. And it's not just the AJF, of course. There is a lot of work to be done in this space. And so I think this session has helped raise a lot of questions. I don't want to be negative. I think again, we've come a long way, but this is a time, next year especially, a good time to reflect, but to double down and to reinvest in the relationship. So it's been very helpful for me with a few ideas to take away, but hopefully for the audience too. And please join me in thanking our panel. And we've almost caught up on time, but tea break now, and we'll shepherd you back in roughly on time.